Today we're going to be finishing up chapter 4 by talking about something that everyone in the room can relate to. Sometimes preachers are not sure, okay, what we're talking about today, is that everyone going to receive it? Is it something that's helpful for everybody? Sometimes it is, sometimes it may not be. But today, for sure, I know that what we're talking about is for everyone in the room, because we're talking about storms in life, right? I don't feel like I have to convince anyone that life is hard, right? Everybody gets that. You know, you can be born more than a day and you start learning life is hard. We all go through difficulties. We all struggle at times emotionally, physically, relationally, sometimes professionally, work stuff, spiritually. Sometimes we doubt, we lose faith. Or sometimes our storm is all of those things all wrapped up in one big storm, right? So the question isn't, will we go through storms in life? That's settled. Yes, you will. Until you see Jesus face to face, you will go through storms in life, for sure. The questions are this, give you a few. Why do we go through storms, right? So if we are for sure going to go through storms, why? Why do we have to go through storms? Good question. Another question is, where's God in the storm? When you're in the storm, where's God, right? And then maybe another one, what's the purpose of storms in our life? If I'm for sure going to go through storms, and it sure seems like God could keep me from going through storms, is there purpose in this, or is God just kind of vindictive, or what's going on there, right? And those are all legitimate questions I think are going to be answered here as we keep going. So for those of you who like to take notes, here you go. Let me give you three, not four, I cut one out, three facts about the storms of life from Mark chapter 4. All right, so three facts about the storms of life. First fact is this: the storms of life are a strategic part of following Jesus. All right, key word in there, strategic. The storms of life are a strategic part of following Jesus, meaning that it's not an accident that you're going through a storm. Okay, now look at this, Mark chapter 4, start reading in verse 35. That day, when evening came, remember the context. Back at the beginning of chapter 4, we saw that Jesus was by the Sea of Galilee, and there was such a massive crowd that they were pressing in, and so Jesus actually got into a boat and went a little bit of a distance away from the shore, right? The water would help project his voice. It'd give him a little bit of distance, probably one of those natural amphitheaters with a hill leading right down to the Sea of Galilee, which if you've ever seen pictures, the whole sea or lake is surrounded that way. So probably could have gone up the hill, could have been sitting there for a long time listening to Jesus teach. That's the context. Jesus is in a boat. And that day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." So question, whose idea was it to go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee? Okay, same problem as last service. Remember, when you're in a gospel, 9 times out of 10, the answer is going to be Jesus, okay? And there's enough of you in here where it could be a lot louder than what I just heard, all right? So we're all reading the same verse. Let's do it together. Here we go. Whose idea was it to go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee? Jesus. Awesome. Good job. We'll come back to that in a minute, but that's important. Jesus is the one who said, hey, let's go to the other side. 36, leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. Now that's just choppy. And it just seems like unnecessary details. Why are they there? For my skeptic friends in the room and those of you who think the Bible is just kind of fairy tales and made up stuff, here's a little thing for you to think about. Why are those details in the passage? What it's saying is the exact same boat that Jesus was in is the boat that Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee in. It's just simply saying he didn't get out of that boat and get into another boat, and also that there were all kinds of other boats that were going to go across with him, and you're going to see other details that we might call unnecessary details. Why are those in the story? They don't help the story. They don't further the story along. They don't necessarily bring any kind of real insight into the story. So why are they there? They're there because it's not made up. It's not fairy tale, right? Historians know this, that when there is unnecessary details in an account, that's a good sign that what you're reading and seeing comes from eyewitness accounts. So we studied this at the very beginning when we started the Gospel of Mark. But most scholars will tell you that the Gospel of Mark are Peter, the Apostle Peter's eyewitness accounts. So Peter was with Jesus through his entire ministry, and most will say Mark was his assistant, which you see in different places in the New Testament. And so Mark was writing down Peter's eyewitness accounts. So why are we getting these kind of unnecessary details? Because that's what happened. It's just eyewitness testimony, okay? So really, there's nothing all that important there other than he's in a boat going to the other side of the lake. And then notice verse 37. A furious squall came up. Now, the Greek language that the New Testament is originally written in would use language that we would call a hurricane. Okay, so this wasn't just like a normal storm on the Sea of Galilee, which, by the way, was very, very typical for that. It's called the Sea of Galilee. It's also known as the Lake Tiberias. It is it's a lake. It's a good-sized lake, but it's a lake. What's unique about it, though, is that it's like 700 feet below sea level. Okay, but on the other side, so really surrounding it on one side of the lake is a mountain range with peaks up around 9,000 or 10,000 feet. Okay, which when you understand what's going on, you got a lake that is so low below sea level. You got evaporation, and you got all kinds of warm air coming up. You got cold air coming down from the mountain peak, and they meet. It's going to create interesting storm weather patterns. Okay, and so the fishermen, the sailors on the water at the time were very, very used to. It's like this was a normal thing for the Sea of Galilee. What wasn't normal was the kind of storm that they're going through. Okay, so we're talking hurricane level type winds is the language. All right, so understand that as you read. So keep going. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat in such a way, look, so that it was nearly swamped. Okay, massive storm. The boat is about to break up. It's about to be swamped. And here you have, you know the rest of the story there. We read it. The disciples are freaking out. And remember, like these are experienced fishermen, most of them, sailors. Like this, for them to be freaking out, it tells you how intense the storm was. Okay, now hold on to that. Now, a couple questions. I'm going to ask you this question again because I think you might have forgot. Whose idea was it to go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee? Jesus. Yay, there we go, right? So it was his plan, his idea to go to the other side. Another question, did Jesus know that the storm was coming? Yes. Did Jesus know that the storm was coming? Yes, now we know that. We know the rest of the story. We know what all the New Testament says about Jesus. He's God. He knows things God knows, which is everything. So yes, of course, he knew that the storm was coming. So here you have Jesus knowingly leading them into this storm that if he doesn't do something is going to kill everybody in the boat. Okay, hold on to that. Now, next question. Could they have gone another way? Could they have walked around the Sea of Galilee? Yeah, they did it all the time. And by the way, there could have been some really cool ministry happening. They could have walked around the Sea of Galilee. There were villages. There were other cities. They could have done Jesus could have done miracles, preached the gospel. He could have had incredible ministry all the way around to get to the other side if he wanted to. Now, another thing, could they have just waited? I know we're Americans and the whole waiting thing is not part of our vocabulary. But could they possibly have waited for the storm to pass? Good job. Absolutely. They could have waited. They could have walked. There's a whole lot of things they could have done, but they didn't. So why did they go? Let me get right to it. Here's why. Jesus was shaping and forming and transforming his disciples. And Jesus does his best discipleship in the storms of life. How many of you have experienced that? Growth, transformation, most of the time happening through pain, difficulties, struggles. Yeah, that's where discipleship happens most of the time. It's in the storms of life, the doubts, the confusion, the pain, the discouragement. That's where Jesus meets us and transforms us into the kind of people God intended us to be when he first created us. Listen, there is no discipleship to Jesus without storms. Okay, that might be something to write down. If you're a note taker, write that one down. There is no discipleship to Jesus without storms. Anyone who tells you differently is either misinformed or they're lying to you or they're trying to sell you something. Okay? That's just the truth. This is how Jesus makes disciples. It's through the storms of life. Listen to the words of Jesus in Luke's gospel. Luke records this. This was how Jesus was calling disciples to himself. Some places it's like, hey, come follow me. Come be fishers of men. Well, this time, notice what he says. Then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves. And then what? And take up their cross daily and follow me. What is Jesus saying there? Like, take up your cross. Well, we kind of all know where that leads. We know what it means for Jesus to take up his cross. It means it was leading to death. He says we need to deny ourselves to follow Jesus. So in some way, we die to who we want to be, what we want to do, to live with Christ. Sure, that's all part of it. But at the very, very least, cross means pain, right? Cross means difficulty. Cross means suffering. And he says to follow me, by the way, is a way of difficulty, sacrifice, and sometimes pain. And we see that here in the life of the disciples. It means to follow Jesus, you go through storms. If they were going to be with Jesus, they had to go through the storm. Why? Because Jesus was in the storm. Jesus led them into the storm. So if they're going to be with him, that's what they have to go through. And we shouldn't be surprised by this. Jesus told us this was going to be the way it is. It won't be on the screen, but just listen. You can write the reference down. John 16:33, where Jesus just gets through explain, because he's about to be arrested, crucified, killed, ascended back into heaven after resurrection, all that stuff. He's about to leave them. But he wanted to tell them, listen, here's what you need to expect as a follower, one of my followers in the world. It's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. You're going to have storms in life. And he told them that. He wanted them to know that so that when they came, they wouldn't lose faith and walk away. Listen to what he says. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. Isn't that beautiful? In me you may have peace. But listen, in this world, you will have trouble. The beautiful thing is, yes, in Christ, there is peace. Like the Bible talks about this peace beyond understanding, right? That passes understanding. It's like, how in the world can you have peace when you're going through these crazy storms? It's because you're in Christ. And he calms that storm in our hearts and our minds, even while it can be raging all around us. Yes, that's wonderful, good, and beautiful as a follower of Jesus, and it's true. But that doesn't mean we aren't going to have trouble. So he says, listen, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart. Be encouraged. The trouble, the storm, the suffering doesn't have the final word. He says, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Okay, so the good news is, and we're going to talk about this later, the good news is that the storm doesn't have the final say. Okay? But in this life, we will have struggles. There will be storms. Somebody by the name of James. James is Jesus' half-brother. He actually tells us, here's one of the purposes of storms in our lives. He calls them trials. Okay, so if you're in the middle of a storm right now, and I know with this many people in the room, some of you are going through it. I've had a lot of conversations the last few weeks with people in our congregation, and there's just a lot of people going through a lot of stuff. And you need to know there's purpose and meaning in it, okay? It's not just random. It's not just an accident. One of those purposes is to transform you, to refine you, to conform you into the image of Jesus and give you the endurance and strength and faith and patience you need to be victorious in this life. Okay, now, I didn't just make that up. Notice, if you would, turn towards the back of your Bible, go to the book of James. It's right after the book of Hebrews. James chapter 1, and these are familiar verses for some of you. I understand that, but man, they're really important for us right now with what we're talking about. So look at James chapter 1, verse 2, start there. Notice what he says. Consider it pure joy. Now he's about to talk about trials. He's saying, consider it pure joy when you go through trials. What? And to make it worse, the word pure there, it just simply means without mixture of anything else. It's crazy. The imagery is of gold being refined and purities. How do you know how gold is refined? It happens through heat, right? So you put a flame under gold. The impurities in the gold rise to the top. They're scraped off because the heat melted the gold down and the impurities rise to the top. That's the only way you get pure gold. Listen, the only way we're purified and made more like Christ is by fire. Right? It's through trial, it's through storm, it's through difficulty. And he's saying, consider this idea with pure joy, without mixture of anything else. My brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, okay, how in the world how can I walk into the storm or be in the middle of the storm and have joy about it? That's a real good question. How can I have that kind of joy, pure joy, without mixture of anything else? Because you actually know it's not an accident, and you actually know God's not being vindictive or angry. He's not that bully on the playground. He's not getting his jollies out of beating you up. That's not what it's about. So you can have joy because you know there's purpose in it. And what God is doing is he's doing everything ultimately for your good. Notice what he says. You can have that kind of joy and you face any of those trials, verse 3, because you know, it's a fact. You know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. It means endurance, it means spiritual strength. Why? So that through life you can become stronger. And then when you face more trials, you're like, okay, I've been through this before. I know God's going to get me to the other side. And you're able to handle trials in ways that you didn't before. Why? Because God did his work in the storm and gave you endurance and strength. Keep going. Verse 4, really important word. It says, let. Okay, God's part is to create the storm, bring you into the storm, do his work in the middle of the storm. Our responsibility is to respond to that and let him do his work. Verse 4, let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete. All right, that's God's end goal, spiritual maturity, meaning Christ-likeness. More and more in your life, reflecting the character and nature of Jesus for your own good and the good of the world and the glory of God. But how do you get there? Storms, trials. And notice he started it all with various kinds of trials. So he uses them all. Sometimes it's a relational thing. Sometimes it's a spiritual thing. Sometimes it's an emotional thing. Sometimes it's a physical thing. Sometimes it's a thing at work. So he uses all of those things. They all have purpose and meaning in our life. It's to transform us, make us mature, make us complete. Then notice how it ends. Not lacking anything. Again, beginning of verse 4, James says, let perseverance finish its work. You see, there's a way of responding to the storms of life that cause us to grow in our faith and our Christ-likeness, which again, by the way, that's the purpose of the storm. But depending on how we respond, we may miss the opportunity for growth. But here's what you can know about God. He wants you to grow. His goal is for you to grow and be more transformed into the image of Jesus. So if he brings that storm into your life, you don't learn your lesson in that storm, guess what he's going to do? He's going to do it again. So be a quick learner. That's the takeaway, right? Be a quick learner. Like, okay, I don't want to go through that again. Jesus, what are you trying to teach me here? I want to learn it, right? We have a responsibility in that. It's not all what God does, it's also how we respond to what God is doing. So here's my question for you. Are you in a storm right now? Listen, if you're not right now, you will be. Did you notice what James says? Look what he says back up in verse 2. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of various kinds. He doesn't say if you face trials of different kinds. He says when you face trials of different kinds. So are you currently right now in a storm? You will be sometime, maybe soon. So is that you right now? And I do need to clarify here. When I'm talking about storms, I'm not talking about things that happen in your life because you disobeyed God. I'm not talking about consequences. That's a whole nother story. I'm talking about things that God brings into our life to transform us and shape us, right? Consequences for us, our disobedience to God, that's a whole nother thing. But that's not storms. That's not what the Bible talks about. That's not trials. That's consequences. That's another sermon, okay? Today we're talking about trials and storms. Again, maybe it's a relational thing. Maybe it's a physical thing or spiritual or work or emotional. Here's what you need to know. No, it's not an accident. God didn't just miss it, right? God's not up in heaven going, oops, sorry, didn't see that coming. Just like Jesus wasn't shocked or surprised when the storm hits. What's he doing in the passage? He's sleeping. He's so confident in who he is as God, he's not worried about anything, knowing that the storm is going on. It's not an accident. God's right there with you in the middle of it. He's led you into it. He's invited you into the storm for a purpose. That's transformation. So listen, lean in. Do you want to be transformed? Do you want to be more like Christ? Do you want to learn the lesson that Jesus is trying to teach you? Do you want that endurance he's talking about? Do you want to be complete, mature, not lacking anything? Lean in then. Lean into it. Don't get bitter. Don't get angry. Don't run away. Lean in. How do you lean in? Man, give yourself to prayer. Give yourself to wise counsel. All right, notice I didn't just say counsel. There's counsel out there that's awful, and then there's wise counsel. Make sure you're getting help from people who love Jesus, know his word, and are going to point you to God in the midst of the storm rather than away from God. Worship. Be in worship. And this is one of the things I see a lot of times is when people go through storms or difficulties in life, you start looking around going, where are they? They disappeared. They stopped gathering together with the saints on Sunday to worship God. That's what you need most in the middle of a storm. You need to be in a place with other believers worshiping God. That's what you need most. And some people let Satan get that foothold in their mind and deceive them into thinking, well, I'm kind of angry with God, so I'm not going to go to church till I feel like going to church. Like, how many of you ever thought that? Well, I shouldn't go to church today. I don't feel like going to church today. Man, if that was the case, there'd be a lot of Sundays you wouldn't see me here. There's a lot of Sundays I don't want to be here either. I'm with you. But then again, that's where Christ meets us most. Why? Because we're leaning in, and he loves that, and he's going to do his work. The last thing you need to do is pull away from Christian community if you're going through the storm. What you need to do is lean into Christian community even more. Christ will meet you there, do his work there. Be patient. Okay, be patient. Know that God is not on the time schedule we are. He's outside of time, beyond time. So as I'm talking about storms, as you read this passage, storm hits, disciples freak out, they shake Jesus, he wakes up, he says, be quiet, everything stops. And we could get the idea, well, all I got to do is pray to Jesus once and it's going to happen. And then you live life and realize, oh wait, no, that's not how it happens. For some of us, we're in some storms for years. Some of us it's a day, some of it's a couple weeks. We don't know. So be patient. Let God do his work in you. Let him do his transforming of you. So 2 things. Know this. The storm will end. That's a promise. In this life or the next, the storm will end. The storm does not have the final say. And then know this. Jesus hasn't abandoned you. Where is he in the passage? He's right there in the middle of the storm. And isn't it good news that he's not freaking out? We're in trouble if we're in a storm and God's freaking out. Right? That's bad news. But here's the good news. There is no storm in your life. No storm in your life where God's going to be like, I don't know what to do. I can't help you, sorry. You're never going to experience it. Why? Because he's Lord of the storm. That's what you see in the passage. He can tell the storm to shut up, and it shuts up. Why? Because he's God. Nothing is beyond his power. Nothing is beyond his control. And the good news is he's actually right there with you in the storm and actually brought you into the storm with him. That's what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Second fact about the storms of life. Write this down. Storms of life reveal our faith and they reveal God's love and power. Storms of life reveal our faith, and they reveal God's love and power. I'm sure pretty much everybody in the room has heard this saying, sports build character. How many of you have ever heard it said that sports build character? Raise your hand. Most of you, right? And generally speaking, I agree with that. Growing up and playing a lot of team sports, the dynamic of being on a team and being a team player and having to submit to a coach and having to play your part, and it's not all about you, it's about the team and all that stuff, man. I know, I can see it in my life, even now as a pastor and as a leader of a team and those kind of things. It did really, really good things in me, and I'm thankful for my experience in sports. What is also equally true is sports reveals character. It doesn't just build character, it also reveals character. I just, this past week, watched an interview of somebody who would be considered a celebrity pastor. It's weird to even say that. Those two words together, celebrity pastor. Ugh. But only in America, right? Like we got that. So we got the celebrity culture, and that slips into the church. This particular celebrity pastor, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, had a colossal fall. It was revealed that he was having multiple affairs. And now this was somebody like so famous that he had celebrities around him all the time. I mean, he was on the news, like this dude was famous, okay? Like real famous, not just church famous, like real famous. Came out that he was having multiple affairs, that he'd been addicted to drugs for a long time and all kinds of stuff, right? And what he said was the success, the money, on top of that, the pressure, expectations, all that stuff, it didn't build his character. It actually accentuated the brokenness in his life that he had been hiding for years. And all of that led to it actually coming out publicly. It revealed what was really going, it revealed the truth about himself. And that's exactly what storms will do in our life. It reveals the true condition of our faith, but also the love and the power and the goodness of God. You see, the storms of life are designed by Jesus to build and strengthen our faith. They're also designed to reveal the current condition of our faith. It's like God turning on the spotlight on our faith. Not because he's being mean or vindictive or wants to embarrass us, because he wants to transform us. It just, in a very real sense, I think a lot of times we don't think of God's love this way. I think a lot of times we think of God's love as how we might want the world to love us, like good pat on the back, good attaboy or attagirl, or always just affirming us in our stuff. And that's what love is called today. Just affirming everybody's junk. Well, if you really love them, you wouldn't say that to them, or you wouldn't tell them the truth. That's what real love is. No, real love is shining the spotlight on the junk so they can be transformed and changed. And that's what storms in our life will do. God will not shame us just for the purpose of shaming us, but rather to wake us up so that we can deal with things as they truly are for our own good. That's what God does. Now, look at the passage. Go back to Mark chapter 4. Mark 4, look at verse 38. So the storm hits, the boat's about to be swamped and sunk. Verse 38, Jesus was in the stern, another like unnecessary detail, right? Who cares where he is? He's in the boat, right? But no, it's in the stern. And I love this. What's he doing? Freaking out? Wringing his hands? No, he's sleeping. And even better, on a cushion. I love that unnecessary detail. I get a lot of like joy out of that, right? I love that. He's just chilling, asleep on a pillow. He's fine. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher," look at this, "don't you care if we drown?" How many of you in your storm have been like, "Don't you care, God?" You could paraphrase this like, "God, do you not love me? I'm not feeling loved right now, God. Do you really love me? How can you say you love me and you let me go through this storm? Don't you care if we drown?" And then 39, he got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet and be still." Which, just so you know, in the original Greek language is the same wording when he confronts people possessed by demons. So it's showing his authority over spiritual forces and natural forces. And in the ancient world, it was understood that only God could control the storm like this. Like, this is a God thing. It is obvious that this is God doing this, right? That's the understanding. Only God could do something like this. And he said to his disciples, oh, I'm sorry, keep going. Quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. This is how you know this is a God thing, not some natural event. The wind stops, but even if the wind stopped instantly, the waves, because of inertia and momentum, would keep crashing for a while. But not when Jesus says to stop. It shows his power. It shows his authority. So he instantly says, shut up, stop. Boom, wind, dead still, and the lake is just glass. How many of you water skiers are like, I'm on it, right? Be out on a lake and those beautiful thing is just that glassy lake, right? That's what it's like. But going from a hurricane to that instantly, that shows you the power of God. Keep going. He said to his disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? You're asking me, in a sense, do you love me? And Jesus' response is, how could you doubt my love for you? How could you doubt my love for you? After all I've done, after what I've called you to, after what I've promised you, how could you doubt me? So, question: what is the storm you are? What is the storm that you're in right now revealing about your faith? What are you learning? Take time. Stop. Look. Investigate. Let the storm do its work. Let God do the work through this storm he's brought into your life. Stop and ask the question and be honest. It doesn't do you any good to lie to yourself. What is the storm that you're in right now revealing about your faith? Or the last storm you went through? What did it reveal about your faith, and what are you doing because of it? And the next question, what are you learning about God's love and power in the midst of the storm? At the heart of this, the disciples were doubting his love for them, doubting his care for them. Is that where you find yourself? It's really important that you know that, because there's going to come a day in your life where the only thing you have to cling to is the love of God. And if you don't think he loves you, you're going to be in big trouble. You talk about depressed. You talk about hopelessness and meaninglessness. If all you have is the love of God and you don't believe he loves you, you're going to be in big, big trouble. You see, the answer to both those questions are determined by how you are choosing to respond to the storm. If you're bitter and angry and turning away from God, you're going to miss the opportunity to experience his love and power. A couple quotes that I ran across this week that I think are really, really helpful. So the first one by Tim Keller. For those of you who might be kind of turning to bitterness and anger in the middle of your storm, listen to this. If you have a God great enough and powerful enough to be mad at because he doesn't stop your suffering, you also have a God who's great enough and powerful enough to have reasons that you can't understand. Wow. Wow. You're mad because you know he could stop the thing instantly. Well, if he's that powerful, think about it. Maybe, just maybe, he's smarter than you are. Maybe, just maybe, he understands things you'll never understand. And maybe, just maybe, he has reasons for this storm that are beyond your comprehension. You can trust him. Another one, Elizabeth Elliot. She was a missionary with her husband in South America. Went to a people group that had never heard the gospel before. This was back in the 50s. They were actually cannibals. Her husband ended up being killed by those people they went to preach the gospel to. What's amazing is later on, she and some other missionaries came back and continued to preach the gospel, and there was this massive revival in this village. The same people who killed her husband became Christians. It's amazing. So I'm going to listen to somebody who talks about storm, like who's gone through that, who talks about storms and trusting God. Notice what she says. God is God. And since he's God, he is worthy of my worship and my service. I'll find rest nowhere else but in his will. And that will is necessarily infinitely, immeasurably, unspeakably beyond my largest notions of what he is up to. Wow. See, storms in life don't just reveal our faith, they also reveal God's love. And it's in the worst times of our lives that we can experience God's love in the deepest ways. And it's in those times that we are reminded, because God loves us, he actually has already done something that someday will remove every storm from your life. That leads us to our last fact. The storms of life don't have the final say because Jesus has overcome the greatest storm. He's already overcome the king of all storms, the worst of the worst. This was the worst storm these disciples had ever seen or ever been in, but it's nothing compared, and Jesus overcame that, but it's nothing compared to the greatest storm that Jesus overcame for us. Notice verse 41. I love this. They were terrified and asked each other, hold on a second. Wait, they were freaking out before. Now, after he calms the storm, now it says they're terrified. And the word there is even stronger. It's like way more scared than they were during the storm. Why? Well, the storm was terrible because it was out of control. And if this one can control the storm, how uncontrollable is he? He can do whatever he wants. Woo, that's real power. They were terrified and asked each other, who is this? Who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him? See, again, in the ancient world, they knew that only God could do this. There were also young Jewish men who grew up their whole life hearing Psalm 107, verses 23 to 32, that talks about the same situation. Sailors out in the ocean and a horrible storm coming and them calling out to God and God calming the storm because only he could. Who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him? Through this account, we're reminded that not only does Jesus walk with us through the storms, not only is he transforming us, he's revealing his love and his power to us, he's also reminding us that the storms of life don't have the final say. Life will not continue on like this forever. Your storms don't go on forever. And that's all because Jesus came to earth 2,000 years ago to deal with the worst sin of all, or the worst storm of all, our sin. That's the worst storm. And by dealing with our sin on the cross, we are guaranteed a future where there will be no more storms. And that's already begun. Because of what Jesus did for us at the cross, we are at peace with God. You're already at peace with God because of what Jesus did for you. That storm that was the wrath of God because of our sin has been calmed because of what Jesus did for us 2,000 years ago. Listen to Paul in Romans. Jesus was delivered over to death for our sins, right? And was raised to life for our justification. Justification means now God sees me as perfect and holy because of what Jesus did. 1 Peter 2, he himself bore our sins. Again, he died for our sins in his body on the cross so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds, the worst storm imaginable, Jesus on the cross bearing our sin, his wounds, you have been healed. And all of that, because of all of that, this will be true someday when Christ returns. Revelation 21. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Old order of things would include all the trials, all the suffering, all the difficulties, even the process of using storms and trials in our life to be conformed to the image of Jesus. That's part of the old way. When Christ returns, no more need for that, because the Bible tells us when we see Jesus, we will be like him because we're going to see him face to face. We'll be transformed in an instant. Now, I need to end with this. There's one more piece to the story that I need to show you here. And that piece is this. It's the link between this account and the life of Jesus and another account in the Bible. It's an account of a prophet in a boat in the middle of a storm with sailors freaking out and fearing for their lives, calling out to God to save them. Does that sound familiar somewhere? I'll give you a hint. It's in the Old Testament. Sound familiar? Right. It's the Old Testament account of Jonah. And it's amazing. If you look at the language and the details in this account about Jesus, it is almost identical to Jonah chapter 1 and the account of Jonah in the storm that they go through. And that's by design. Mark intended to do that, right? This is the account. This was all set up so we could see the link, right? Except for there's one detail that's a little bit different. Think about the Jonah account. Jonah told the sailors that they need to throw him overboard and kill him in order for the storm to stop, right? Throw me overboard, I got to die. That's what has to happen. But in Mark, Jesus isn't thrown overboard. He just calms the storm with his words. But we do know the rest of the story, right? Jesus ultimately does sacrifice himself to calm the worst storm, the storm of our sin and the consequences of our sin. Jesus wasn't thrown into the storm. Jesus walked up a hill outside Jerusalem, walked into the worst storm of all time, carrying on his back the cross, stretched out his arms, and calmed the eternal storm for all of us so that we could be at peace with God forever. Now, if you think that's a stretch, Jesus himself makes the stretch. So take it up with him. Look at Matthew 12. He answered, Jesus speaking to Pharisees who were like, show us, prove to us you are who you say you are. Show us a sign. Look what Jesus says. A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet who? Jonah. This is Jesus talking. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man, referring to himself, will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And he goes on to say, now something greater than Jonah is here. Jesus is saying, I'm the greater Jonah. I'm the true Jonah. And I'm here to calm the storm. So no matter what storm you're going through right now, you can know for sure you aren't going through that storm because God doesn't love you. He loved you so much that he walked into the greatest storm of all time for you, so you'd never have to. So trust him in the storm. Turn to him in the storm. And know the one greater than Jonah is right there with you. And he's for you.